Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Craig Holliday. I'm a teacher at Bakersfield High School, and Mr. Reese has asked me to spend a little time with you today talking about material, but also about teaching in the classroom and what that's like in the modern era. And let me say a few things to begin with. Number one, I have a lot of materials in front of me that I want to share, some things I want to talk about. So if you see me darting around with my eyes, please don't think of it as unprofessional. In this weird corona quarantine environment, I'm doing a lot of what I'm doing right now, making videos, explaining things to my students. Now, I believe in the magic of the classroom. I believe that you get up front of the classroom and you have this vibe with the students, and it is absolute gold, and you can't match that. So in a sense, I apologize that this has to be done this way, the same way I would apologize to my students, but unfortunately, it's just the way it's going to be. So hopefully you find this valuable. I want to talk about material. Mr. Reese has asked me to talk about some things after World War II. I'm happy to do that. But I also want to throw you some tips along the way. At the risk of sounding like an older fellow, I want to make sure I give you some advice from someone who's been in the classroom for a little while and who's seen some things and, to be frank, has made some mistakes that maybe you can avoid along the way. So let me begin with this. Who am I? My name is Craig Holliday. I have a bachelor's degree in history from Gonzaga University and a master's degree in history from Marquette University. I got those kind of out of high school. I didn't know what I wanted to do with myself. And I had a mentor in my undergraduate years who said to me, Craig, just go off and get a graduate degree. It'll always serve you well. You'll need it in a sense, but it'll help you find your way. And when I went and did that, I really had no idea what I was going to do in a professional sense. When I got to Marquette, one of the things that they had me doing was teaching these discussion sections with undergraduates. And that's where I fell in love with teaching. Until then, I didn't really know exactly what that was like. And then I did it, and you catch the bug. You know what I'm talking about. You're here yourselves. So that's what that led to for me. Now, first tip I would give you, get a graduate degree. Okay, you've got the time. If you're young, if you're not young, hopefully you can make some time. But go put a couple more letters after your name. No job you ever get in this profession is going to be like, we were hoping you wouldn't have a graduate degree. It's a wonderful thing to have. So go do that. It helps you with your knowledge base. It's going to help you get paid more. But from a very practical standpoint, it's the sort of thing that an employer looks at and says, hey, this person has a graduate degree. If you can get it in the field, that's great too. Okay, now I understand it might not be in the field. Maybe it's in education. It's not in history, for instance, or political science or economics, whatever. Get yourself a graduate degree. You want to go and get more degrees after that? Go ahead. But I would say for now, go get a graduate degree as well. Maybe in the first couple years of your teaching career, it doesn't work as well, but go do it when you can, okay? Number two, how did I get to Bakersfield? Well, I fell in love, as happens, and I fell in love with this wonderful woman from the Bay Area who I've been married to now for 22 years, and she was coming back to the Bay Area from Wisconsin, where we were, and I, in essence, sent out this all-call letter looking for jobs throughout high schools in the California area, and I got one at Garces Memorial. And I taught there for 2 years, and then we went back to the Midwest. We went to St. Louis, where my wife went to school for a few years to get her master's degree, and then I came back to Bakersfield. I was at Garces for another 5 years before I had the incredible luck of coming on board and working for David Reese at Bakersfield High School. And that leads me to the second tip that I will put forward. This is a small town. I know that we have 350, 400,000 people in it, but it's a small town. You're going to meet people along your journey here who are absolutely class acts, and David is one of them. People who are going to be in your court, at your back, helping you have a career. Don't go out of your way to do dumb things and upset people, okay? Mr. Reese has always been, for me, a cheerleader, a guy who would be absolutely willing to support any idea you had. Now, he's never going to just say, hey, do whatever you want, but he's going to be there to support you. And in my eyes, he was an ultimate administrator. I knew there was a standard. I knew as a teacher that I needed to hit that standard, but he wasn't a guy who was knocking down your door every day saying, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? He trusted you to do your job and be a professional, and he was fantastic. So as you meet people like David Reese, those are the people that you want as good, close associates. people that along the way are helpful voices to hear. Okay, David Reese is an absolute mentor for me, a guy who taught social studies, who I understand on a professional level and is also a fantastic human being, a guy whose office door was always open and he had a big jar of candy in it. And you'd go into his office and some days when you took some candy, the conversation would be, "Hey boss, how's it going?" "Good." And that was it. And other days you'd talk more about things. But he's a fantastic person. You're gonna meet people like that. And when you do, you hold on to them. I am so glad that I remain at BHS, that I had the opportunity to work for David. Now, he probably wants me to spend less of my video talking about him, but there it is. I was going to say that. I'm going to cross that off of my list over here. There's no way I was not going to get that in there, okay? I came to BHS, and I started out teaching AP European history, and then the next year I picked up AP US history, and really for most of my career, I've taught advanced level social studies classes, and it's my niche. Okay, and this leads me to perhaps my third tip, if you like. And eventually I will get to material, I promise. Find what you like doing. Okay, there is this presumption in some areas that doing one thing is better than another. In other words, people might say, "Hey, should I go and teach AP classes or honors classes? Is that better than?" If that's you, go do it. If it's not you, don't go do it. I'd say the same thing about becoming an administrator. Do you want to administrate? That's a simple question. Or do you want to do other things? Don't feel as though you have to go and become an administrator early on in the teaching career. I have great friends who have gone into it. They've loved it. I'd also like to think I've had some friends who went into it and thought, this is not my bag. And that happens, okay? So in a sense, find out what you're good at. I know in my heart that I can get into a classroom of a certain type of students and I can do my job. I can work the room well. I feel like 20 some years in, I have an experience at it. By the same token, you put me into a room with people who don't care at all, I'm going to struggle. No doubt. That is not my skill set at its core. So I've been lucky enough to teach the sort of student I feel like I connect with. And that has helped me to have a great career, right? When I wake up in the morning, I'm not lying to you. When I wake up in the morning, I enjoy the idea that I get to go and teach. Okay, now, in the coronavirus world, I do it sitting here in my office with a YouTube video. It's different, obviously, but it's one of those things, you know, whatever. Okay, what do I teach right now? I teach honors U.S. history and honors European history, and I also teach an adjunct class at Bakersfield College in the evening. That's also online at this point. For the last 6 or 7 years, I've been lucky enough to be a grader for the College Board. If you do find yourself teaching like advanced placement classes, that would be my biggest advice there. Become a grader. Become a person who reads the exams at the end of the year. It pays a little bit, but don't do it for that. Do it for the fact that you get to see how the College Board thinks. And if you are someone who's teaching their exams, you want as much of an insight as to how they operate as possible. So become a grader if you can. If you're in those fields, it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. Okay? So let's do this. Let's look at some material. Now, I have provided a PowerPoint here. Okay, the first slide on the PowerPoint has my name on it, where I teach, Craig Holiday, Bakersfield High School, and then it has my email address. I will say this honestly and openly. I'm happy to receive whatever email you'd like. I'm happy to give you anything I have. I teach European history in the sense that I pick up in the Renaissance and I go to the present. I teach U.S. history. I pick up really in the pre-Columbian period and I go to the present. Maybe my materials would be helpful to you. Maybe they would not be. But if you email me and you say, hey, my name is, whatever your name is, and I'm with Mr. Reese's program and class, and I was wondering if I could have some materials for you, I will give you anything that I have. Absolutely happy to do it. Okay, I would love to help young people out. If you need somewhere to do some observation hours once we actually get back in classrooms, or if you're looking for somewhere to, just come and watch people teach, I can set you up with great people at BHS as well. I'm not trying to sit here and advertise for BHS, or maybe I am, okay? But that would be absolutely wonderful if you wanted to come have a look, okay? So let's dive into some material, okay? Mr. Reese mentioned that where we are in the grand scheme of things is a bit after World War II. And so I thought that we would dive in feet deep into the Cold War. Now, I have a slide here that says pre-lesson context topics, some things that I would imagine you've talked about if you're going to get to where we're getting today. Okay, so for instance, the Cold War conferences that happened during World War II at Yalta and Potsdam, the idea of the Cold War, containment policy, the Marshall Plan, the Berlin Airlift. Whether you're talking world or US, these are topics you'll end up talking about. Tip number, whatever number we're on, okay? You can never know enough about your subject matter. You can't. Always be reading something. Have a book that you're looking at, and I'm looking up here for books, and I've got a variety of them. I don't have to throw you books to tell you I have books, but you're always looking for a little bit more. You know what you're really looking for is a good couple of nuggets of information. Something where you can say to the students, here's a neat little side story, and they go, oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. So that's what I would be always reading, looking around. And maybe you're not a reader person. Maybe you're someone who wants to watch documentaries or you want to listen to podcasts. Totally fine. Great that you can consume the information in different ways, but always be trying to garner more and more knowledge of what it is you're teaching, okay? That being said, if you find yourself in a situation and someone says to you, hey, Holiday, here's a question, and you don't know it, be flat about it. I don't know. That's a good question. Let's figure it out. Now, in a world of cell phones, everybody in the room could probably figure it out with a Google search, but make a commitment to that student to say, I'll find that out for you. Nothing more impressive than the next day when you begin with, hey, but let's start here. Yesterday, Joe had a question, and Joe asked this, and I was doing some research about it, and here's what I found out. The kid's going to be like, man, he remembered to go look that up? That's awesome. Always do it. Don't come up with a fake answer. Kids are like sharks in bloody water. You come up with an answer that's not the right one, and that phone's sitting right in front of them. They will narc you on the spot. Now, should they have that phone out and be playing on it? No, more on that later. But they are going to absolutely Google that, figure out that you're wrong, and they're going to call you on it, and it's not going to be pretty. So if you don't know the answer to something, admit it, but try to know as many answers as you can by reading and enlarging the subject matter you have on the topic. Okay, that's what our summertime is for, right? That's what our extra hours in the day are for. Becoming better and better at this craft. And the more knowledge you have, the easier it is to teach this stuff, okay? So that's all the pre-lesson context things, all right? Next, straight into Vietnam. Okay, so let's talk about it this way, though. If this were a class period, here's how this would begin. The bell would go. Boom, the bell has happened, okay? I'm probably going to give it about 60 seconds for the room to settle. Okay, I've got 57 minutes in the class period. I'm not going to hurry along too quickly here, okay? My time is valuable, but kids are going to be coming in from the restroom a little bit. They're going to be sitting, and kids are going to know that when I stand at the middle, generally, and my kids mock me for this one, so here you go. I generally go, all right, folks, let's go. And that's the sign of, and when that happens, the next step is I'm going to talk about the news and notes of the day. I'm going to talk about 3 things, generally speaking, to start the class period off. And it's not material. I want to talk about an international story we should be paying attention to, a national story, and a local story, so that students in the classroom are getting a little bit of news. You would think that people who have devices in their day, 78 hours, or in their hand, I beg your pardon, 78 hours in a day, would have the news, but they don't. These people, unfortunately, don't have enough of the news coming in, and so you have to stand there and be like, well, yesterday they had a New Hampshire primary. Here's how it went. Let's talk about what this means. Or locally, here's a manufacturing plant that Amazon is looking at or something. And just talking about the news a little bit makes an important difference. So that would be step number 1 in my day, okay? Step number 2, I asked this honest question. What are you guys up to? What's going on? What's the game today? Who's playing? Girls basketball is playing over here. The choir's got a concert. The drama thing's coming up. I wouldn't spend a long time on it, but I'd give it 2 minutes or so of, hey, what's going on with you guys? You show an interest in what the students are up to, and they're going to show an interest in what you do. If you got up there and you said right off the bat from the first minute, and now we start with material, you're going to turn them off. And keep in mind, they're on a 57-minute ride, and they're looking at you like, oh, this is going to be long. Okay? You got to give them a little bit of warm up. You got to be like, hey, what's going on in the world? Hey, what's going on in your world? How you doing? What's up with you? Visit with a couple of kids here and there and make a personal connection, and then we go. Okay? Once you begin, I generally think that you shouldn't go longer than about 15 or 20 minutes without breaking in some way. So the material that I've put together for you here might not necessarily follow that. And then please understand that the material I've given you here would not be one day. there's a lot here to be chunking this into one day. And I would hope along the way that students would be asking questions and that over time we would get a better sense of what the material is, okay? I'm gonna lapse now into what I would be doing as a teacher, okay? I prefer to work with a PowerPoint behind me. Now, 2 years ago, I went out on jury duty and the sub I had broke my screen. Now, it was the best thing, pardon me, I gotta get a notification off my phone. It was the best thing that ever happened in my life. And I'll tell you why. Because when they broke that screen, I just didn't put one up there. And now it projects right onto the whiteboard, and then you can underline and draw and make connections. I'm not saying that when you get into a school site, take the screen off, because that might get the principal and the vice principal a little upset. But if it happens to you, it's not a bad thing. So what you're seeing right here, this slide that says Truman in Vietnam, that would be projecting up onto the screen, and I would just be writing away on it, underlining what's important and going over it. It's important for us to look outside of Europe. Okay, the more we do world history, the more the experts who are teaching this are trying to say, for every European example you discuss, that is to say, if you're going to talk about the Berlin Wall and the Cold War, or you're going to talk about the Berlin Airlift, I need a third world example, or I need an Africa example, an Asia example. And the way the social studies curriculum, the state standards are written, you can do that. You can pick one that is more to your notion. Here I've chosen the Asian route. Here I want to build up this notion of the United States helping out in Vietnam. And initially, that's what we're doing. We are there to help a friend. The United States needs the French in order to be on our side for NATO negotiations in the European part of the world. And what that means as part of containment is we're going to have to help the French out here. Now, a document I might consider throwing right here is something by Ho Chi Minh. I've got a picture of Ho Chi Minh here in the bottom right-hand corner. Ho Chi Minh, in his Declaration of Freedom, if you go back to the one he writes around the end of the First World War, has a lot of Jeffersonian notions in it. So I would break the document out if you wanted to, if you're looking to maybe go over a document with students, and you could use that there to talk about where he got those ideas. You know, you want to see the notion of these ideas of liberty as they go around the world, and Thomas Jefferson's language that Jefferson obviously gets from John Locke, the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness language, is right there in the declaration that the people of Vietnam are trying to make. Now, unfortunately, due to Cold War issues, we're not on Ho Chi Minh's side, right? When Ho Chi Minh stands up, he says, I am a Vietnamese nationalist, subpoint, I'm a socialist. But unfortunately, in our Cold War mindset, the moment we hear that second point, socialist, that's what we've got. You're a socialist. Sorry, we're not on your side. We're going to help out the European colonizer who is trying to take control of the area. And it's not easy for the French, right? This entire debacle for them is a constant war against the people of Vietnam to try and get them to accept French leadership. Now, if you're the Vietnamese and Ho Chi Minh could have told you this, bring it on, guys. We have been here before. We withheld against the Chinese, we withheld against the Japanese, we're going to withhold against the French, and when it turns out to be the United States, bring it on. We're not backing down. We have a long history of indigenous struggle. We know how to face these colonial oppressors. That's how they're going to see France. That's how they're going to see the United States as colonial oppressors, and we will just dig in our heels and fight the way we've always fought. And there's that. Okay? Now, in the same continent, the United States ends up going to war in Korea. Okay, now, looking at the map, and as I said, I hope you printed it out. If you didn't, maybe you're looking at it. So let's look. It's important to note that this is a artificially divided country. Before World War II, there is no North or South Korea. There's Korea, and it's occupied by the Japanese. The liberation of Korea during World War II was done jointly. So there was a partial liberation by the Soviet Union. You'll notice that the Soviet Union, if you look back at the map here, borders North Korea just right on the top there, okay? And then the United States also helped to liberate from the South. So as they did with Germany, there's this decision to say, okay, we'll split it 50-50, okay? And the line drawn here, the 38th parallel, as I said, is completely artificial. Right? You might live in a village 1 mile from someone who now lives in North Korea, and you live in South Korea, and you are in no way different. But this is the way the Cold War is going to go. In 1950, the North Koreans push into South Korea, in a sense, testing whether or not the United States Cold War policy is going to hold here. Because keep in mind, if we go back to our context, the US has been willing to show support for containing communism in other ways. It was money, for instance, in the Berlin airlift. It was the ability to assure logistically that we were going to feed all of those people in Berlin. It's been money in the sense of the Marshall Plan. And here, the North Koreans, and in a way, the North Koreans are really operating with advice from and approval of the Chinese and the Soviets. The North Koreans are saying, I wonder if it includes boots on the ground. Are you guys actually going to show up and defend South Korean lives, or are you not? Or are you someone who really wants to assure that South Koreans are protected from communism? They catch the United States, in a sense, off guard with this attack that, as you can tell by the second map, pushes the U.S. almost, the U.S.-led South Korean government, I should say, almost all the way off of the peninsula. And then the U.S. is going to charge back in as a part of the United Nations and push the North Koreans out of the country. After that third map there's a key moment where American thinkers are negotiating and considering what happens next. There are those people within the American government, Douglas MacArthur is the leader of this field, who's going to say, this is the moment. Why wait? We have the advantage in nuclear weapons. Why wait? Let's just go into China and we hit every single Chinese city of size. And if the Soviets give us any guff at all, we go blow up every city in the Soviet Union of size. And then we wait 30 days and we see whatever's left, and then we go hit them again. And we don't wait for these people to get stronger. We take a moment when we are stronger, when we have the atomic advantage, and we just carpet them into the Stone Age. Now, President Truman is going to resist that logic and in essence say, we shouldn't do that. It's a lot of resolve, right? You probably have taught about the dropping of the atomic bombs and the decision that Truman makes there. It shows a lot of growth as an individual for Truman to be able to self-assess, to look in a mirror and say, we should have done it there, but we shouldn't do it here. So we should stop ourselves. And so Truman says, no, we're not going to do that. And eventually you can see where the Cold War line sits there between North and South Korea. And that's where North and South Korea remain, really a remnant of the Cold War. Now, if you're sort of looking from the American perspective, you would say, look at South Korea. South Korea is this enormously strong Asian powerhouse of economies. Hyundai, Samsung, K-pop. It's an enormously strong economy and country. And on the other hand, North Korea, not so much, right? North Korea, we're telling people to eat the grassroots sometimes. That's horrible. It is not a great state in that way, right? You ever seen that map? There's a cool map. Maybe this is something you throw in the presentation where they took a picture of Asia at night. And you can see by the lights where everyone is, like places like Tokyo are huge, Beijing's huge, right? Singapore, North Korea, dark, because there's not much light there. Okay, that shows you the lack of sophistication. And if we're looking at this as a Cold War relic, then the United States would say, well done us. Let me pause for a moment, material-wise. A map's a good thing to have, okay? Every slide I've got up here, I try and put with it a map or a picture or a political cartoon or a something. And it's something that over the course of your career, you're going to develop and they're going to become more part of the routine, right? In the first couple of years, maybe you're just coping. You're just like, what am I going to do today? What am I going to do today? Okay. And then over time, you're going to build on that. Okay. But a map, good thing to have. Okay, kids are very visual. Think about this generation of learners. They are glued into the idea of I need to see it. I need to see that information in order to absorb it, I beg your pardon. And so a map is a very nice thing to have. I would always, on a slide, when necessary or when possible, a map, a photo of the person we're talking about, some sort of chart, graph, some conversational thing like that. Always nice to have, okay? We go back to Vietnam in the 1950s. Okay? America has shown at this point that we are willing to put boots on the ground as we did in Korea, and now the situation is going to change. As the slide reveals here, the French lose their position in Vietnam, and the United States has a question. Do we care? Do we walk away from this thing? The United States could certainly say to the people of South Vietnam, we have done as much as possible, and unfortunately there's not much else we can do for you. You're on your own here. It's no cheap thing, right? We've been funding the French there. When the French lose to the North Vietnamese at Dien Bien Phu and withdraw, the United States feels the pressure. And what are we going to do? We're going to put in ourselves to try and solidify the situation. This is Cold War containment. No domino is too small. South Korea was not too small. South Vietnam is not too small. You look around the world and America is paying and paying. I just threw my pencil at you, sorry. And paying and trying to build up these governments to assure that they will not fall to communism. And it is expensive, but the notion is that no domino is too small to be undefended. You must defend them all. And that is going to be a laborious, expensive process for the United States. This is the beginning of the United States having a strong presence in South Vietnam. We're going to have some military advisors on the ground. We're going to be spending more money there. But really, this is us trying to hold on to what's going on in South Vietnam. Next slide. Our man, Nikita Khrushchev. Okay, I like Khrushchev. And if you don't know Khrushchev at all, it's not that I think he's a fantastic human being, but I like a character. And students do too. Somebody who says stuff that's a little bit edgy and over the top, and you're like, wow, that's not political at all. And so I love talking about Khrushchev with students. The video I have tabbed here is about an 8-minute video, and if you haven't seen it before, you owe it to yourself to go watch it, where Khrushchev and Richard Nixon hang out together. So in the old days, they used to have this thing called the World's Fair, and I'm not sure if they still have it. Maybe they do. The last one, I think, was in Kazakhstan. Maybe that was the end of the run. But the World's Fair was an exhibition, and every country would show up and be like, look, here's what we make. Here's our country. We're proud makers of Kleenex, okay, or something like that. So in the clip that I have here, I think the year is 1957, okay? Maybe it's 59. I beg your pardon if I'm wrong there. But in the clip, Khrushchev and Nixon are in Moscow. Now, earlier that year, the United States had hosted the first part of the World's Fair. The two cities agreed to joint host it as a Cold War cooperation activity. Good times. Okay? And in New York, the Soviets had sent everything you would expect from a display of the Soviet Union. Rocket technology. Where, let's be fair, they were kicking our butt. They were way better than we were. Okay? Military hardware, all of this. And in response, the United States sends to the Soviet Union a kitchen. It's beautiful. It's like a modern 1950s Leave It to Beaver, if you've ever seen the show, kitchen. Got a stove and an oven and a fridge and a toaster and a blender. And what we're saying to the Soviet Union, Cold War style, is, you got that? Do you have those? Do the people in your apartment buildings that you built have that? Because we do. Just saying. Our people have that. Do you have that? It's the ultimate test of the Cold War when you think about it, because the Cold War is about lifestyle. Who's offering the better existence? Is it democratic capitalism, or is it socialist governing? And the United States is saying, in our model of things, we have so much overall that people have this. And we're looking at the Soviet Union saying, I know you sent some rockets, a fair play on your rockets, but here's our kitchen. Can you show the people of the Soviet Union a kitchen and, in the same sense, say Americans have this and you don't? Okay, that's what we're trying to get at them. Now, in the clip, Khrushchev and Nixon, if you know nothing about Richard Nixon, Nixon is a wooden human being. Sweats like a fool under the bright television lights and is really not someone who has a great repartee, right? He's going to eventually get elected president. I got it. That's fine. But he's not someone who has a lot of style to him. What he really is kind of a wooden human being, right? Khrushchev, on the other hand, is a character. Hold on. My phone's running out of juice here. Okay. But he has a lot of excitable characteristics. He plays to the crowd. He makes a joke. He kind of enjoys himself. Okay, pardon me while I make sure my phone doesn't run out of juice. I'm going to pick this up. I'm going to pull it over here. And we are going to plug in the phone. I know you're going to be like, is this actually happening? Yeah, it's happening. That way we'll be fine. Okay, we good there? Okay. Thank you. I just didn't want the video to die halfway through its life. Okay, so if you're Khrushchev, you're having a good time with this, right? And Nixon, on the other hand, is clearly the undercard in the comedian show. The video is an awesome debate about capitalism and communism and the differences. And Khrushchev is an unapologetic communist. He's like, this is what people believe. Look at what we're going to achieve. America, you've been around for how long and you've only achieved this? Pah, a kitchen. Okay, so it's a great video. Let me pause the material for a second. A 7-8 minute video clip is golden. And I'll tell you why. Because you're going to get up there and you're going to teach 5 periods today. And the pressure to go and go and go is there, especially in the early years. You want to find one of these a day. If you can find a 6 or 7 or 8 minute video clip, that is going to save you a lot of energy. And I believe firmly that at the end of the day, you should be tired. You should get up there and hurl and teach and do your thing, and you should walk to your car tired. But by the same token, I also think that you should give kids a little bit of a break from you. And one of the things that you can do to do that is to throw in a little video clip like this. So be on the lookout for great little nuggets like that. As I said, like a few minutes of a video does so much. It's one of the things I had on my list here. I gotta find where to cross it off. That's there it is. There it is. It's on the cross-off list, okay? Back to our man Khrushchev. Khrushchev comes into the Soviet Union, as the slide talks about here, and makes a big deal about how we're going to change business. Things are going to be so different in the Soviet Union. We're going to have this period of what's called de-Stalinization, where Khrushchev comes out and he completely rats out Stalin. Stalin had died in 1953, and until then had a grip on the Soviet Party that was just Stalin, right? And here comes Khrushchev saying, we abused the people under that reign. Stalin abused the power. It was about Stalin, not about the Soviet people. And the world goes, whoa, this is different. Are we going to get someone completely different now? If you're America, you've kind of gotten used to Stalin. You know what to expect. This is a little cagey, a little bit, whoa, what do I have here? And what you have is someone who's going to be perhaps different. At least that's what Khrushchev says. It will be different. How will it be different? We're going to end repression. You can say whatever you want in the Soviet Union. Wow. We're going to improve the amount of consumer goods we make. We're going to catch up with and pass the United States. We're going to allow countries under the Soviet Iron Curtain, places like Poland, Czechoslovakia, we're going to allow them the opportunity to rule themselves. Whoa. Whoa, I would say. Right? That's completely different. So Khrushchev looks like he's going to be a breath of fresh air. Until he's not. I'm waiting for the slide to switch here, okay? Pretty quickly, the people of the Soviet Union decide, okay, not Soviet Union, I beg your pardon, the Soviet sphere, decide, let's put this to a test. So in 1956, the people of Hungary say, let's see if this is the way it's actually going to be. And the Hungarians put together this revolt where they tear down the Soviet appointed leader, they put in a new democratic regime, and then they go, what's going to happen? Okay, are the Soviets going to let this happen? Because really, you know how this will run. If Khrushchev stands back and he says, do what you want to do, then the entire Soviet umbrella is going to leave. The Polish, the Czechoslovakians, everybody's going to leave. Of course you would. Who wants to live under these conditions? And so we're sitting there waiting, and when the tanks roll in and crush, absolutely crush this revolt, the world goes, okay, Khrushchev, okay. You said it was going to be different. It isn't really that different. You may not be Stalin. You got jokes. You've got some sweet outfits and a nice hat, but you're certainly not going to let us do our own thing. So, fine, okay? The video I attach here is a little bit about the revolt, but it's also about, and this is another area if you wanted to spend more time with, maybe this is something you're kind of passionate with, have a look at the 1956 water polo match between Hungary and the Soviets. So these Hungarians go off to the Olympics in 1956, right? And they're kind of waiting and hearing what's happening at home. And you can imagine what it would be like. These are people who are in a sense, hoping that their loved ones are not going to die. And when the Soviets eventually do crush the revolt, in the days afterwards, the Hungarians play the Soviet Union in a polo match that is remembered as the match of the blood in the water. That those guys get into that pool and they beat the living snot out of one another. And the Soviets come out of it, the Soviets lose, and they come out just bleeding all over the place. And the Hungarians are kind of like, that's right. Now, the Olympics are supposed to be about love and peace and cooperation, but once in a while, global politics gets in there too. So again, like I said about the video on the last slide, have something here, right? I've been going for a while now. You would say, well, maybe you should have stopped. I'm kind of just running some material, but a video here wouldn't hurt. Or maybe some firsthand accounts of people who are alive still, or maybe these are accounts that were recorded in years prior, and you could talk about how those people felt in Hungary, or some sort of a written document, or anything like that. As I said, you don't want to go more than about 15 or 20 minutes. You want to break it up. You want to put it back on the students a little bit. Otherwise, they're gonna check you out, and eventually it's no good. Okay, they'll get to the end of the class and be like, what did we do again? Yeah, you don't want to be that person. Okay, you don't want to be that teacher. So always try and chop it up a little bit there. Okay, on some of these slides, you'll notice at the bottom it'll say something like Nixon 10. And what that is multiple choice questions that I have in my study guide that I would say, okay, guys, let's turn to page 10. I want you to read the passage. I want you to answer the multiple choice questions. It's a little bit of a breather. It puts it back onto them, gives them something to be like, okay, we're going to do this for a second, and then we'll get back into it. Okay, the flow of the day should be a few of those. Here's about 15 minutes of material, here's a something. Here's 15 minutes of material, here's a something. And that might be the whole day. 45, 50 minutes might be it. Maybe there's more than that on that day. But be sure there's not a wall-to-wall set of here's me talking and you listening. Okay, because eventually that tires. Right? Teachers are the worst students in the world, let's be honest. You put a teacher into a climate like that and we're all going to be like, some of you have probably thought that about this video already. So, hey, there you have it, right? Just kidding. Moving on, okay? I like to talk about the Berlin Wall, but let me get to the next slide first. You need a good map, okay? When you talk about the Berlin Wall, what you have to make sure students understand, the kind of important underpinning here is they have to understand that East and West Berlin are all in East Germany. So I like a map that, like this one, shows you where those cities are in relation to the overall scheme of things. Otherwise, the wall makes no sense. Because students think that the wall divides East and West Germany all the way down the line of East and West Germany, which it doesn't. Okay, it goes down and sort of centers off. And let me go back to this one here. Sort of sections off, I should say, the portion that is West Berlin, where you don't want people going to. I love this topic because it lets you talk about a brain drain. You're teaching in Bakersfield or somewhere near it. It is not that hard to relate this one, right? You're going to say something to your students like, all right, here we go. How many of you in 10 years see yourself living here? And if it's anything like my class, you're going to go about 4 for 40 or some number like that. A few kids are going to be like, yeah, I love it. Bakersfield's great. And most of them are going to be like, you ask them where they want to be on that, somewhere glamorous. LA, San Francisco, oh my God, I want to live in Denver, New York, Miami, Chicago. I want to live in London. Great, fantastic. That's a brain drain though. And the Berlin Wall is an example of a brain drain. The wall is intended to stop the flow of East Germans and people living in the Soviet sphere, whether or not they live in the Soviet Union or in Poland or in East Germany or wherever, intended to stop them from moving into the western portion of Berlin. And the wall is built for that purpose. And the picture I have here is kind of the fundamental and kind of ugly rudiment of it. It's a wall, and early on, this is what it is, right? They start out with like very straightforward sawhorses, and they put those up overnight, and then they move in with what looks like a pretty ugly constructed cinder block wall, let's be honest, okay? And over time, the wall becomes more and more armed, but it becomes a symbol of the Cold War, perhaps the symbol of the Cold War. And as I said, it's a cool thing to talk about. Khrushchev is responsible for it, as well as the East German leaders, but it helps us talk about a brain drain. And you can really get students into the idea of, whoa, hey, people who want to leave an area. And again, you relate it back to the depth of the Cold War. And you say, at its heart, the Berlin Wall is a testimony to the Cold War and the style of life. People were voting with their feet. 2 million human beings had left the Eastern Bloc to live on the Western side. That says something about living on the Eastern side. No one is trying to go the other way, right? We don't have to build the Berlin Wall to stop people on the western part of Berlin climbing into the east. That's not happening. It's Easterners trying to climb into the west. And that happens a ton. Okay, people not coming back. People really, as part of the brain drain, leaving the sphere. And the Soviets were tired of it. And that was the only way to stop people from doing it. Okay? All right. Some other things I would say here. I always try and overplan a little bit, if I can just break from the material a little bit. In other words, I like to be in my brain to a point where I think we'll get to here. And if you don't get to here, that's fine. You don't want to shoot under, though, because then you find yourself a little bit, especially I found in my early years, panicky. Because you're like, ooh, this is going too fast. This is not supposed to be happening yet. Overplan a little bit. Have more than enough. You can always use it tomorrow, or you can always use it next week, Monday. But overplan. Have more than enough. If you have to just table something and come back to it, no problem at all. But don't go in purposely thinking, I don't think this is enough. If you're thinking that, it probably is not enough. Okay? Some other things. Be flexible. Okay? And I will relate this back to people that I've worked with over my career at both Garcis and BHS. The people who last in a place are yes people. They're the people who you go to and you say, hey, I need a hand with this. And they say yes. And David Reese is a person like that. Not to go back to talking about Mr. Reese, because I'm sure he doesn't want me to talk about him anymore like this. But be a yes person, right? In the early part of my career, I coached junior varsity soccer. I assistant coached girls JV soccer. I coached some golf. I was a class representative. I did some silly things in some homecoming rallies that I look back on it and I go, oh, that's dodgy. But that's what you do. If you're an early year teacher, be a yes person. Okay? Administrators, when they interview you, are going to want to know what you can do besides the 5 periods I just hired you for. Coaching's great. Moderating activities, academic decathlon, science bowl, debate, speech, choir, band, ag, mock trial. There's another science. I already said science bowl, I think. All of those. If you have an interest, that's something that you should be willing to share with the school, especially in the early days of your career. I'm not saying you eventually dry up and stop doing things, but you need to be able to say, I'm going to do this. Okay? When I got to BHS, I was hired on, I had been a coach at Garcis, and I was coaching golf there, and I enjoyed it, but then I had a child, and to be honest with you, that sort of ended the notion of me coaching because I didn't have the time for it anymore. And so I realized that I needed to do something else. I was at BHS my first year, I didn't have any other extracurricular things, and I started to look around, and I noticed that my friends did. And I'll be frank with you, I thought to myself, you can't do it this way. You need to be more involved. And in the second year that I was there, CSF, California Scholarship Federation, the advisor who had been doing it forever and a day stopped doing it. And I said to David and to the vice principal at the time, I see a lot of these kids anyway. That sounds like something I could do. I'm still doing it today. It's fun. It's pretty straightforward and easy, to be honest with you, but it's a little bit of a service. Do that for your school. Be a yes person. Administrators like it. Colleagues like it. The students understand it better. If you're a no person, no one wants to hang out with you in that way. Okay, be a yes person. It makes a big difference in that sense. Okay, and get rid of that off my list here. Let's go back to a bit of material. Okay, I want to spend a moment in Cuba. Right, as I said, you want to try and hit different parts of the globe. You don't want to tell, especially if we're teaching world history. You don't want to teach a world history story that's just Europe and the United States. And I know the Cold War can feel like that because it's the Soviet Union in Europe and the United States got it. Okay, but you want to see the tentacles of it. You want to see the branches of it. So we've been in Asia. Here we are in Latin America. Okay, if you want to expand it in other areas, Africa's awesome on the Cold War, right? And if you know nothing about it, a lot of those African countries realized exactly what the U.S. and the Soviets were doing and played them. Went and got exactly what they needed without pledging loyalty to other sides. That's beautifully done. I'll go to the U.S. and be like, what do you give me? I'll go to the Soviets. What do you give me? And in the long run, I'm going to side with neither of you, but I'm going to end up with a sweet system of roads and a wonderful hydroelectric dam. Score. Okay, that kind of Cold War policy, it's interesting. Students like that in the sense that they can see the foolishness of it, right? They, from all the sides, they go, wow, they were willing to pay for all that stuff? Yeah, there it is. Okay, so expand it when you can. Look at other areas. If there's a particular area you're passionate about, maybe you did some research about it, maybe it's your family's heritage, maybe it's just a topic you dig because you saw a documentary on it, put that out there. Kids love it. A little bit of depth is an enormously cool thing. It might not be something you test about. I will honestly say that in the middle of class. I'll be like, listen, guys, I would never test you on this, but listen to this. And then you tell this neat story, and they're like, oh, that's sweet. That's a nice thing to take away. Okay, but the apprehension of the testing sometimes holds them up. So if you say that, I wouldn't test you on this piece of information, but I want to tell you a story, that's nice. Okay? All right. When you look at Cuba to the United States has always been a touch point. It's an area that we start to get involved with as a result of the Spanish-American War, but there's a lot of calls for the U.S. to get involved with it even before that. In the late 19th century, U.S. policymakers are thinking, is that a territory that we should just go and conquer right now? And eventually we do in the Spanish-American War, free it, give it its own government, but that government is always heavily under the control of the United States. So on the slide here, I have a picture of Fulgencio Batista on the left, who is the leader of the U.S.-backed regime in Cuba, and then Fidel Castro on the right. And I like to use the picture of Fidel Castro as a baseball player because kids go, wait a second, he's a baseball player? And he was. He nearly had a professional career, and things might have gone a whole lot differently. But it's fun to show them that that's part of the ingredient as well, okay? So when I'm talking about this, and in a U.S. class, you probably go with more depth. In a world class, I might not go with as much depth, right? In a U.S. class, I would go deeply into how Fidel changed Cuba, what problem we had with it. In a world class, I might just talk about the fact that it became socialist, and because I'd have other things to talk about, I'd move along. But if I were teaching a U.S. class, I would deeply explain that as a result of this became a socialist country, that the Soviet Union was a big benefactor of it, and it was a flag, in essence, in our backyard, that it helped the Soviet Union to be able to say, look at that, right next to the United States of America, a great socialist nation that we're helping to support. That shows the movement of socialism, right? If you're the USSR, you're in a world game. You're trying to get as much territory as possible, and having one literally 100 miles off the coast of the United States is a heck of a feather in your cap. It's a big thing, okay? All right. I don't have a picture of Jack Kennedy here, but maybe you would add that, or maybe you'd do a little bit of Kennedy before this. In my classroom, I try and show some of the campaign videos that Kennedy has out there. He has a particularly catchy song in '60 that's like, Kennedy, 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 Kennedy for me. And if you're a U.S. history teacher, I love those videos. Every year, 60, 64, 68, there's these sweet campaign videos. Put them out there. Kids think they're hokey and kind of kooky and whatnot, but they're really, really good stuff. They start in 1952. If you're teaching U.S. history, throw the 1952 I Like Ike commercial on there. That's the Eisenhower commercial in black and white. And then put the Kennedy one up here in 1960. And there's a big difference. The demographic you're appealing to with the Eisenhower commercial versus the Kennedy one's huge and different. So it's fun to play with. Okay, so use things like that. Look around for sweet little videos like that. All right? My point being, I don't have a picture of Kennedy here. But I would talk about, before I discuss this issue, how out of his shoes Kennedy is in foreign policy. That as a general thing, this is not a strength for him. And it's something that Khrushchev exposes, right? There are great accounts of how much more versed in the way of doing this Khrushchev is than Kennedy. And as a result of it, Khrushchev is able to take advantage of the young Kennedy, right? In the Bay of Pigs invasion, in case this is something you're completely unfamiliar with, when Kennedy becomes president in early 1961, the knock on Kennedy is that he's young and he's green and he kind of doesn't know what he's up to. And that's what you might say about someone in their early 40s, the youngest elected American president. So what Kennedy does is he puts together a plan that is based on an Eisenhower plan. This is a plan that Eisenhower had been developing through the 1950s after the Castro overthrow to replace Fidel Castro. The plan called for the funding of ex-Cubans and elements that America was going to fund, and those individuals would go over and try and retake Cuba and it would look like an organic thing. That's important. It's supposed to look like the Cubans did it, not the United States of America. So all the equipment that they had been painted over, and none of it said the United States of America. It basically was generic stock stuff. Now, if you scrubbed it a little bit, United States Air Force on it. But we're not going to scrub it, right? We'll make it look all generic, if you will. The idea is, if I'm Kennedy, I give the go to this plan. These guys attack Cuba. They overthrow the government. And then I can say to Khrushchev, look how short-lived that was. Look how foolish that was. The government didn't even last 5 years. How foolish was that? Okay, and so Kennedy greenlights this plan, and it is an absolute debacle from day one. And unfortunately for Kennedy, it proves all of the negative stereotypes. You're green, you don't know what you're doing, you're a little hasty, you're young, yeah. Oh, yeah, it's a tremendous failure for him. Okay, why did it fail? Some of the guys who were going back had told relatives. Castro had informants in the group that was coming. They knew exactly where to be. The U.S. air support didn't arrive in time, and they got plastered. And then, here's the negative part for the United States. It looks like you're interfering in a country. It absolutely does, because you are. And you're standing there saying, here we are, the United States, and we say to the Soviets, don't interfere in the politics of other nations. But we kind of did. And that's sticky. So unfortunately for the United States, that's a big negative there, okay? All right, I then go into the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I'm looking at my time here. I got less than 10 minutes left. I want to make sure I give Vietnam some love here, so I'm not going to go too in-depth here, but let me say this. The video I have here is from a documentary that's longer called The Fog of War. The Fog of War, and you can find the whole thing in different parts on YouTube. You don't have to buy it. Is a documentary look at Robert McNamara. McNamara was Secretary of Defense under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, and so he had a unique seat of watching what was going on in the Cuban crisis, and he talks about how they tried to empathize as best as possible with the Cubans and with the Soviets in order to avoid a clash there. He is also then Secretary of War or Defense, I should say, for Johnson, and as a result of that has a front row seat for the Vietnam War. Now, halfway through the Johnson administration, McNamara loses his job because he has disagreements with Johnson over the direction of the Vietnam War, but there are great clips in Fog of War about the Cuban Missile Crisis, then about the American role in Vietnam. There are even some about the carpet bombing of Japan. It's something McNamara was involved with as a soldier in World War II, if you want to go all the way back to World War II. So The Fog of War, Robert McNamara, it's about 20 years old. McNamara has since passed away, but even in his mid-80s, when he is being interviewed for this video, he is sharp, on point, and incredibly informative. So it's the sort of thing you could revisit. You could show students a clip here during World War II and be like, wow, he has an incredibly powerful portion of it where he talks about firebombing Japan. And he's like, we firebombed Tokyo. Tokyo was roughly the size of New York. And then we firebombed this city, roughly the size of Chattanooga. And this city, roughly the size of Dallas. And it goes down the list, and students are like, oh my God, we really blew the place up. So it's great. And then you can come back and you show them some Cuban Missile Crisis stuff, and then you can show them some Vietnam. I'm not saying you show the whole thing. I'm just saying that the resources out there, it's a sweet documentary, and if only for the development of your own knowledge, it's worth looking at. Okay. All right. I briefly in here have JFK in Vietnam. Okay. Kennedy, unfortunately, is going to have a very short presidency, as you know, and it looked as though Kennedy supported America getting out of Vietnam and perhaps moving on to other things around the world. And when he is assassinated, that's going to change. Now, how much do you talk about the assassination? That's up to you. If you love the conspiracy theories and you want a deep dive there, kids will love that. By this time of the year, though, generally you have a good sense of whether or not you need to be putting the pedal down. And if you're running out of days, it's probably something you just say, he's assassinated. Maybe you show the video, maybe you don't. The video these days are pretty graphic. I don't know. I'd be a little more cautious in the early years of my teaching career, I'm not going to lie, okay, than I would later on. Okay, sometimes these days I'll show a video and be like, okay, guys, if you're squeamish, don't look at this. Okay, like the Kennedy assassination video. And students are good about it. But in the early years of my teaching career, I probably would be like, I'm not showing it. If you want to go YouTube it. And then inevitably somebody in the back of the room, grabs their phone, YouTubes it. And they're like, oh my gosh. Okay, phones. Let's talk about it for a minute before I go back to Vietnam. It is an absolute part of the modern teaching. I try and limit it as best as possible. I try and focus people. I try and say, guys, put them away. Let's do this right now. Every teacher is going to have their own particular tact. I would say to you, if you're interesting enough and if what you're doing is rigorous enough, you demand attention enough to where they're going to have to pay attention to you in order to not have their phones out. That's what I would pitch to you. Now, that being said, some students are recalcitrant. They're just not going to put them away. And at the end of the day, you can confiscate them if you will, or if you want to, beg your pardon, you can do something else, but some students are just kind of stubborn about it. It's the reality of the modern classroom. Okay. The bottom of this slide here has one of these like multiple choice things, MC. Those would be multiple choice questions I'd have my students looking at, okay? Johnson in Vietnam. This is where things get dicey in Vietnam, okay? Kennedy dies, and his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, is far more of a war hawk in Vietnam than was our man Kennedy. And so you're going to see the United States, after the Gulf of Tonkin attack, push themselves into Vietnam in a big way. If you're teaching U.S. history, this is the beginning of some very, very sweet stuff you can do. Okay, you can talk student protest, frustration on the civil rights front, the youth in America rebelling against the government. There's fabulous documents to be had, things to be read, like the Port Huron statement is out there that deals with people's protest. You can look at speeches given by civil rights leaders. You could look at like the life of Muhammad Ali and his particular reasons and not wanting to go to war. But the 60s are just a wonderful time of teaching, not just from a Vietnam standpoint, but if you're looking for the effect of a foreign policy decision on the domestic policy, boy, there's a lot to be had. So this would be a really ripe moment of teaching where you look around, you find a lot of good stuff and give kids a variety of whether it's documents or it's videos or it's discussions about things that are they seem tangential, but they're really, scaffolding well for you there. I would definitely do that. Johnson's going to decide to push the United States into Vietnam in a much more aggressive fashion, right? Troops on the ground, huge bombing campaigns. I've got a slide here that shows us how many troops on the ground. And what I would be using here is how the war is escalating and its reflection on the home front. In other words, I can see this war getting more and more serious for the United States of America, but by the same token, I can see the domestic unrest unraveling here. And you get to 1968, and boy, what a fabulous year to teach. Right, you've got Johnson dropping out of the race, and then sadly you've got the deaths of Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy, and then you've got a Democratic convention going up in smoke in the summer, and oh man, is that a sweet time. So as I said to you, there's a lot of things out there. Okay, as I kind of come to the end here, some other random things that I would say are some tips. Okay, I said to say yes a lot. Yep, I would, as you go through your career, try to get to know your students. I would try and be as personable as possible. I would teach to who you are, though. I tried in the first couple of years of my teaching career to be kind of a hard ass, pardon my French, but I tried to be that, and that's not who I am. I like rules, I like routine, but I like to enjoy myself, and I like a funny laugh, and I like to just sort of get along, and that's who my personality is. When I teach to that, and when the classroom allows me to teach to that, I feel like I can do great things. Okay, if you get up there and you're someone other than who you are there, I don't know if it works that well. Okay, I have met incredibly effective teachers of every possible personality, but every one of them to a person taught as they were as a person. They did not try to mask it or become somebody else on the stage and be different. They were who they were. And I think that's an incredibly valuable thing for you to think about as you walk down the road of a teaching career, okay? Let me say this to you. Craig Holliday, I teach at BHS. As I said, my stuff's available to you. If you want to email me, if you would prefer a conversation, I'm happy to end up eventually giving you my number. And if you want to chat, we can chat. This is a wonderful career. It is the best job in the world, and I'm not lying, and we should tell students more of it. You know, the math and science people are out there telling people that STEM is the end all be all. This is the soul. This is the stuff that makes people human in a sense. It's what I've given my life to. It's what I love doing. I hope you share the same passion. If there's anything I can do across the grand sweep of a career this year, next year, 5 years away, I hope you'll remember me, and I hope you'll get in contact. Appreciate Mr. Reese. He's one in a million. He's an absolute gem. Take care of yourselves out there. It's been a pleasure.